There are shocking experiments that people have mainly done on themselves to see how long they can go without sleep, but you will always burst into flames if people are short-slept and having to drive. That a nap makes a significant difference on your risk of an accident. You can't really choose to sleep longer. It's fundamentally difficult to do. Striving for perfect sleep isn't helpful.
Are there any other myths out there around sleep that we've not gone through?
8 hours is probably the big one. Biggest impact. If you're really not sleeping well, I'll say the biggest impact is this.
Before we get cracking with the show, we have a very exciting announcement. Now, the clock's about to go back, the nights are getting longer, and it's that time of year when it gets harder to get outside, but it's also when women tend to feel least safe running outside. Recently, there was a survey done and 60% of women said they didn't feel safe running alone. Now, we don't like that, so we've decided to create Boldly Run Club. We'll be meeting every Wednesday outside the clubhouse in Putney at 6:30. Come and join us for up to 5 miles easy at a social pace. No one is too slow. This is just a run club to bring everyone together, to get everyone running through winter and everyone feeling safe over winter too.
We'll be posting about it on our Instagram page, so check that out. And if you have any questions at all, then please message us. We can't wait to see you there. Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy. On today's episode, we are joined by Dr. David Garley, sleep expert at the Better Sleep Clinic. David works with a range of people, from athletes to CEOs, to help them improve their sleep quality so that they can perform better every day.
Steph, I'm so excited to share today's chat because I was lucky enough to have a one-to-one consultation with David a while ago about my own sleep. And I think a few things struck me. First of all, certainly since I have been running at a high level, I've been really conscious of my sleep. But what I was surprised about is that David said that actually so many people don't realise that the impact that bad sleep is having on their day-to-day performance. And it was only when he said that it actually reminded me that I kind of used to be that person. I used to be convinced I could operate really well on 4 hours sleep. And it's only now that I've kind of changed my perception of it so much and my views on sleep that I think, God, how many mistakes and how many kind of errors of judgment must I have made on 4 hours sleep? So I thought that was a really interesting point. And actually, I think the more we can just understand sleep and how it does affect us day to day, the more it can really help people just, by changing quite small things to perform better in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, it is so interesting because sleep really is the biggest recovery tool. And I don't think everyone realizes that because you can't sell it. So, you see all these recovery tools everywhere that you can buy and they become the most popular thing. But because you can't sell sleep, it's not widely known just how powerful it is until you really understand it, which is why I'm so excited to hear what David has to say about it.
You're so right. It's almost because it's that free, easy thing that makes it so hard for people to accept that it will really help them. But I'm sure we will share a lot more on that on today's episode.
And something I'm really interested to ask you, though, is how has your sleep changed from when you were stuck in the middle of a marathon training block to now when you haven't been training as much? Have you noticed changes in your sleep and also how you prioritize sleep?
I'm definitely less tired. I know that might sound like a really obvious point because I'm not training as hard, but I think it made me realize how tired I actually was during marathon training and how much more I really needed my sleep. But I think I would say my sleep is generally still pretty good, and I'm not one to stay up late every night. I do quite like my early bedtimes, but having said that, I think I've had more late nights over the last 9 weeks than I have over the last 8 months. So, which in a way has been really nice. It's nice to be more relaxed about it, but I really feel like it does impact me the next day and I can't concentrate. I just feel like my mood's a bit low. So I definitely think that just because I'm usually so habitual with my sleep, it perhaps impacts me more. But an interesting point came up in my consultation with David that I think I mentioned that to him. I was almost asking to aim for this perfect sleep. And he made a really interesting point that actually there's no such thing as perfect sleep, partly because we don't fully understand what that would look like, but also there's got to be some kind of acceptance that it's not always going to be perfect and so much of it is out of our control. And he did say one of the most common causes of poor sleep and sleep disorders is actually anxiety around sleep. And that almost made me relax my views on the last 9 weeks even more. Like, it doesn't matter, it's as long as I generally am functioning well and I know I will get back into a good sleep routine when I'm training, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that is a really key point, because then if you're stressing about sleep, then it's going to affect your sleep. So just being relaxed, accepting it won't be perfect, and that's just going to help you have a good quality sleep.
And what about you? I mean, I know you're also a fan of the early bedtime.
I love an early bedtime so much.
But what are the most fundamental things do you think that you focus on in terms of sleep?
So one thing for me that I really try and do is, honestly, like after 7 p.m, if I don't have anything that I need to do, I really try and not do anything sort of work related or something that's going to potentially stress me out. Like even life admin, after 7 o'clock, I like to just sort of do things that are slightly mind numbing. So that's definitely one thing. And I know, because Joe likes to plan things in the evening. So he'll be like, I don't know, planning a holiday. And I'm like, okay, just send me what you want and then I'll look at it tomorrow, because I don't want to do that in the evening, because I know it will just wake up my brain. So that's one thing, just like shutting down the brain. And then the other things when I'm actually sleeping is I always wear an eye mask and earplugs, and that just almost just shuts out the world. And I think it's just become routine now that I associate them with going to sleep, that it is a comfort. As soon as I put that eye mask on, it's like, okay, it's like a hug for my face.
I think that's actually such a good thing to get into, because then when you travel as well, and you might not be in a place where you can have a dark room and quiet, then you've already got the tools and it's not weird. Like I remember I also sleep with an eye mask, but when I didn't, and then when I went away and tried to use it, it just woke me up because I wasn't used to it. So it's a good point to try and get used to it, especially if you're racing abroad. It's a really good one.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we have so much to dive into today, so shall we crack on with the show?
Let's do it. David, thank you so much for joining us for 5 Miles Easy. The first question is, what do you do and why do you do it?
It's an excellent opener. So I'm a medical doctor. I'm director of the Better Sleep Clinic. So I work with patients, with athletes, to try and get them sleeping better. And why I do this is because sleep is a really satisfying area to work in. So I used to work in a hospital, I used to be a respiratory doctor. And respiratory medicine is really interesting, but some of the treatments haven't quite kept up with investigation and diagnosis. So there's lots of conditions that you know a lot about, but you can't do quite as much as you'd like for them. You're often left wanting to do more. But the big exception is sleep. So respiratory doctors deal with a lot of sleep disorders, because a lot of sleep disorders relate to how you breathe when you're sleeping. And the main one that you might hear about is obstructive sleep apnea. So this is this condition where your upper airway repeatedly closes when you sleep. So you're constantly waking up. You get really fragmented, poor quality sleep. And the diagnosis is relatively straightforward in the treatment. And when you've got someone established on treatment, someone who might not have slept properly for what could be a decade, that sometimes 2 days later they're a completely new person. It's a really satisfying place to work. So I've since set up the Better Sleep Clinic. We deal with obstructive sleep apnea and insomnia and athletes. We work with athletes to get them sleeping better. But it's great to work with people and see such a profound improvement in their quality of life.
And why does sleep help our overall health? Kind of from a really high level perspective, why do we need good sleep to be healthy?
That's another good question. I mean, the most fundamental model of health is the 3 pillars. So this is exercise, nutrition, and sleep. So these are the 3 fundamental things that you need for health. And certainly if you look at what people do and they want to get better, they often think about exercise, think about nutrition. They don't necessarily think about sleep, but it does make this huge impact. And you can see what the impact is if you just think back to the last time you didn't sleep very well and how you felt, that you would have felt like a zombie. You'd have no motivation, you have really poor concentration, be quite irritable, often quite low in mood, and that's just after one night of poor sleep. So the reasons that you do sleep are to basically counteract these. So one way that you can look at sleep is that it supports your daytime function. So it's not necessarily about what happens at night that that you're doing the sleep. It's to support your daytime function, if that makes sense.
And what's happening? So say, you're a bit grouchy, your mood's not great, and it's because you haven't had a good night's sleep. What's kind of happening inside you there? What's affecting your body to make you feel that way?
These are very good questions, and I might give you quite flat answers, unfortunately. So sleep's a really difficult thing to research, partly because when someone's sleeping, they're unconscious. Fundamentally, they're quite difficult to interact with and research. So what you're forced to do is research sleep from half a step back, that you look at large populations of people who don't sleep well and see what happens to them. And so we know the effects of poor sleep that can cause this irritability and, short temper, but particularly the reasons why aren't quite so clear. Mood stability is thought to relate to a particular state of sleep called REM. So you might know that sleep isn't one state. It's broadly defined into sleep that's associated with brisk fluttering eye movements, that's REM, rapid eye movement, and a state of sleep that isn't, which is called creatively non-REM. And REM, they think, is due to is for the function of emotional stability.
Talk us through the sleep stages. You talk us through those in a bit more detail. So you've got REM, non-REM.
Yeah.
Is that the same as deep?
Yeah, let me explain. So broadly, you've got REM or non-REM. So REM, you might know, is your vivid dreaming sleep. It's so vivid, in fact, that your body actually has to be paralysed, something called REM atonia, otherwise you act them out, which is bizarre. And in terms of the function of REM, they think that, with vivid dreams, I don't know if you've ever wondered why there's such a high emotional content in a dream. There's often themes of survival, you're being chased by something. And it's thought that you're exposed to such high level of emotion in a dream that you have an opportunity to try and regulate your emotions. And then this then carries through to daytime function. And then non-REM, so non-rapid eye movement, this is further subdivided into 3. So you've got non-REM 1, which is really light sleep. This is dozing that you might do in front of a boring Netflix documentary or something like that. So that's really light sleep, and you might not even know that you're doing it. You then got non-REM 2, which is still considered light sleep, which is a little bit deeper. But then you have non-REM 3. So this is your really deep restorative sleep that you need to get in order to feel refreshed in the morning. So these non-REM states of sleep are more about things like memory consolidation, so moving memories from your short-term to your longer-term memory. And these are things, it's not just list learning that you might do for an exam, it's also muscle memory. So if you're an athlete and you're learning new techniques, new ways of doing things, that this is important for the muscle memory. It's also growth and repair happens a lot during this state of sleep. So growth hormone, which is a key hormone in repair and growth, is released almost exclusively during sleep. So if you're missing out on sleep, you will miss out on growth and repair. And in a similar way, testosterone. Aspects of your immune system are protein-based in the form of antibodies. So these get regenerated during non-REM sleep. And there's various other functions that are carried out. You mentioned slow wave sleep.
I didn't, but...
As you not? Deep sleep?
Deep sleep,
Deep sleep, yeah. So it's got different names. So
okay.
It is deep sleep. That's what it is. It's a deep state of sleep. But if you put electrodes on someone's brain, there are hallmarks of the different stages of sleep. And with deep non-REM 3, you get these slow-moving waves. So it's often referred to as slow wave sleep. So that's what sometimes if you come across these different terms.
So that's really the most important stage of sleep for feeling good the next day, basically.
Yeah, I would say so. That and REM. There's not like a hard crossover, a hard line between these different states of sleep, that they do other functions to a degree. And I think it's also important to caveat that this isn't a completely understood science, unfortunately. I wish there was a bit more data on it, but it is still, there's a touch of vagary about it.
Do you know why some nights you get more REM? So like some nights you obviously dream more, and some nights you might have deeper sleep. Like, why does it change?
Yeah, so I think one thing to ask is, do you think that there's a difference between how much REM you get or how much you recall your dreams? Because it's quite variable how much you remember a dream. And if you wake up straight from REM, there's a good chance you'll remember it. But I don't know what it is for you, but I always feel it's like having a handful of sand that's kind of, you're trying to remember it when you're awake, but it just sort of disappears. And then you have actually no idea what actually happened. But sometimes you are left with, the feeling of the dream, like whether it was scary or whether it was a good dream. But you can't, for the life of you, remember what was in it.
You wake up in a bad mood because you were angry at someone in the dream.
Yeah. Or angry that your wife did something in your dream and you're mad with her when you wake up. It's quite bizarre. So I think your ability to remember dreams definitely varies night to night. But you do get different amounts of REM. You don't have like all of your non-REM 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then REM. You actually go through it in a repeating cycle. So you normally fall asleep into non-REM 1, 2, 3, bit deeper, then work your way out, have REM, and then you wake up, which you might not know. But after each sleep cycle, that's a sleep cycle, which lasts on average 90 minutes. But after that, you actually wake up. And that's thought to be evolutionary, that if you think about sleep, it's quite a vulnerable state, that if you're, lay out on the floor for what could be 10 hours and, you're not looking, your eyes aren't open, you're not listening, that anything can come and eat you. So that the feeling is that if you woke up every 90 minutes or so, you can recheck your surroundings, see if any predators have moved in, and then fall back to sleep again. Is a theory. And if you're sleeping in a group, that at some point there'd always be someone waking and checking the environment.
So if there's like an alarm in the middle of a sleep cycle, not at the end of that 90 minutes, is that when the alarm feels more annoying?
Yeah, so that's comes onto this idea of sleep inertia. I don't know if you've heard of.
I've heard of it, but
Yeah. So I'll explain. So normally when you wake up, you wake up. If you wake up naturally, you wake up from a very shallow state of sleep. So often REM, which is very shallow. But if you have a rude awakening, alarm goes off or whatever. If that's from deep sleep, non-REM 3, you basically just feel like a zombie when you wake up. You feel sleepy. You go back to sleep straight away. You're low in mood, and this is significant for people when they're trying to work out how good their sleep has been. Because if you wake up in the morning, one of the ways that you know you've had good sleep is if you don't feel sleepy anymore, if you feel alert, energized. But if you wake up from deep non-REM 3, you'll feel like a zombie. And so you often think, I haven't slept very well, when actually you might have done, but you just need a bit of time to get out of that sleep inertia and wake up more.
Impact you later on in the day at all? Or once you're kind of over that slightly foggy state, will you actually be at your peak performance because you've had a good night's sleep?
Yes. So once you've kind of snapped out of it, then you would be fine, assuming that you slept well otherwise. But you can, sometimes people will wake up, they'll have that sleep inertia, they think, I slept very badly, and then you can generate this kind of foregone conclusion that you think the day's going to be dreadful because you haven't slept very well. And so you need to make sure that, make sure you're up, have a shower, have breakfast, wait until a bit later in the morning, and then that's a good time to assess whether you've slept well once you've had a proper amount of time to wake up.
Interesting. Now, how does light affect that? Because I always feel like I can get up so early in summer and feel great.
Yeah.
In the winter, I have to set my alarm to get up at 6:30, which normally in the summer I will be up earlier than that. Won't struggle at all. 6:30, it's dark in the winter, and I feel terrible when I wake up, even if I've had a good night's sleep.
I mean, that's a really positive way of putting it, because a lot of people say that it's so annoying in the summer because the sun comes up at 5 or something and you lose out on 3 hours of sleep because you're awake. But yeah, light is a good way of kind of coaxing you up to a shallower state of sleep, from which point it's easier to wake. So if that coincides with what your normal wake time is, and presume as an athlete, with the amount of training that you do, you probably are up quite early. So that, as you say, you probably find very beneficial. There's quite a lot of research about how sleep can have quite a negative light can have quite a negative effect that way. So in your room, and a modern bedroom, it's quite difficult to make it dark, that you've usually got a charger or there's some light that kind of, on your curtains, if you don't get them to meet in the middle, that there's a bit of light that just sneaks through from a street light. So that's another big offender. But if you haven't got your room completely dark, there's good evidence that even if you're not really perceiving the light through your eyelid, that it's still pulling you up to these shallower states of sleep. So that even if you sleep for 8 hours, 10 hours, that it can be much poor quality because you're having less of that deep non-REM 3. So this is why, if you've ever looked at sleep hygiene advice, that they always bang on about getting your room dark. It's quite difficult to do, but you can get better sleep as a result.
And do those lights work? The ones that like rise slowly in the morning?
Yeah.
Would you recommend those to make it easier to get up in the winter?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you struggle getting up in the morning, then, and if you get these, sleep inertia wake-ups, then yeah, definitely look at it. You because there are some quite expensive branded ones you can get, which are good, but you can also get apps on your phone that will just have some light creeping in on the backlit display, which is also quite effective at getting you up. So you don't have to get a branded one, but a bit of coaxing to wake up is pretty good.
So I guess good sleep, ideally you would have sufficient amount of all the different stages. But if you could design kind of a perfect night's sleep, what would it look like?
So most people, if you ask them where they want to be with their sleep, would say that they want to get into bed, they want to fall asleep quickly, they want to sleep all night, and they want to wake up easily in the morning. So no overnight awakenings. So that broadly is what most people want from their sleep. So that's one way of looking at it. In terms of the sleep, it's called the sleep architecture, so your route through the different states of sleep. That's a more difficult thing to sort of comment on because it's quite difficult it's not a process that you're involved in. It's completely unconscious, involuntary. But I suppose if you could have you want probably the normal distribution of the different states of sleep. So light sleep is usually about 50% of your nights. Deep N3 is pushing sort of 20%, and REM maybe a little bit less. It does vary a bit from night to night. And then the other way of looking at it is, if you think that the role of sleep is actually to support your daytime function, then you just want to make sure that you're up kind of crisply, that you're alert and on the ball throughout the day, not fatigued, not irritable, not wanting to go back to bed, and then falling asleep quite quickly at night. So if you think about it from those terms, then whatever sleep you need to get to provide that daytime function is the sleep that you need, and it's really individual. So it's very difficult to compare your sleep needs to the sleep needs of another person, and this is a trap that is quite easy to fall into. That if you see, particularly from an athletics point of view, and we find this a lot in sport, is that there are some quite outspoken role models who talk quite openly about their sleep and that they might sleep for a huge amount of time. So I think Roger Federer said he used to sleep for 12 hours, which I like. When did he train? I don't know when he did that. So, and that's quite an impractical thing to chase after. But it's really about knowing your own sleep need, knowing what sleep you need to support that daytime function, and aiming for that.
Interesting. I mean, I always feel like if I don't get, I know 8 hours is kind of banded around as the magic amount.
Yeah.
But I actually resonate with that. I think if I get 7 hours, I feel terrible. And actually, if I sleep for much longer than 9 is also good, but if I sleep for much longer than 9, then I feel like I've kind of a bit groggy. I feel like I've slept too much. But how little sleep is okay? Is there kind of a limit where actually no human can function on so little sleep?
So I know what you're saying. So for you, 8 hours is obviously what you need, and you're quite clear on that. And that's really good, because it's good to know what your sleep need is. Your sleep need does vary. So in athletics and sport with our clients, we talk a lot about how your sleep can affect your daytime function, but your daytime function also affects your sleep. So your training also affects your sleep, and you'll find if you're training a lot, you might find that you're sleeping a little bit more, or you get that desire to sleep more. But sleep, an important point here is that sleep has a quality as well as a quantity. In situations when you sleep a lot less, you will find that you get a lot more deep N3 sleep. It's not just about the quantity. Is there an absolute level that you could? I don't know if the experiment has been done yet. There are some shocking experiments that people have mainly done on themselves to see how long they can go without sleep, but you will always burst into flames. These are people who've stayed up for like 5+ nights, and they get really ill usually from a psychological point of view. You get quite profound hallucinations, and so there's a DJ in America. I think it was in the 50s. He was broadcasting the entire time for about a 4-day show or 5-day show, and he got very sick at the end of it. So it's never recommended. But you will always fall asleep.
Yeah, the thought makes me feel sick.
Yeah, you can't. It's not sort of feasible to do.
Yeah,
that, so.
And so everyone's individual, as you said, but do people have like a natural body clock? Because you have people that say they're night owls, or people that say they're early birds, and they want to go to bed early, wake up early. Are people naturally that way, or actually are we all very similar and we just have to train ourselves to go to bed at a certain time?
Yeah, so it is quite individual. So one of the main systems that control sleep is your circadian rhythm. So this is, this idea that our bodies have this natural rhythm, which has a day phase or a wake phase and a night or sleep phase. And there's actually quite a lot of body processes that are controlled on this basis, on this circadian system. But sleep is one of them. So, and this has evolved because as humans, we're very reliant on light for our activity. So we've evolved to be very active during daylight and sleep at night. And this has its own internal momentum. But not everyone's circadian rhythm is exactly the same. So morning larks and night owls are the common ones that you hear about. So this is the idea that people vary in when in the day they get their best hours. So a morning lark would be best in the morning, and a night owl more at night. And you can get quite extremes of that. And it is individual, and it changes throughout your life. Should you change it to do something? I guess the answer is probably no. The research suggests that there's no health impact from being one or the other, but morning larks tend to fit better with society. That if you get up early and have your best hours in the morning, you just tend to fit better in jobs and so on. Whereas if it's not till 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. that you get your burst of energy, then that's quite hard to fit with society. And so if you are very rooted as a night owl, but you try and force yourself to be a morning lark, then your sleep quality is probably going to be worse. And because of that, you might do slightly worse.
Can you ever shift it?
You can, yeah. So if you talk to career bakers, for example, they spent an entire lifetime getting up at the crack of dawn. And when they retire, I don't think they really revert briskly back to their night owl status. So you can entrain yourself, it's called, to do that. But it is quite variable. And you'll see that. So if you travel across time zones, so if you get jet lag, you'll find that some people adapt relatively quickly and other people take a bit longer. And the reasons for that also vary. So some of it is because of how rigid your circadian rhythm is and how much it can adapt. But also it's about how prepared you are to do the behaviours that entrain your circadian rhythm. So making yourself get up early in the morning. Moderate exercise is a good way to reinforce the wake phase of this circadian rhythm so that sleep can come more naturally at night. Getting out and exposing yourself to light. So there's a big behavioural component to that, as well as how you are designed.
Why is it so much harder traveling traveling east versus west? So like when you go back in time, it's a lot easier to adapt.
Yeah, I always need a map to try and work this one out. I find it's like a really hard maths puzzle. But basically, if you are flying east, when you land, it's going to be later by local time.
Yeah.
And so your bedtime will come earlier, and it's quite difficult to go to bed early. You know, if someone said go to bed at 8, you'd probably struggle. You might not. I think you said your bedtime's about 9:30, but most people. But if you were told to go to bed at midnight, that's fine. It's the challenge. It's easier to stay up later than it is to go to bed earlier. So that means you can correct a bit easier.
So interesting, because I go to the US quite a lot for training, and I obviously, when I go over there, I'm flying west, so I wake up very early, but I really struggle to ever get on the right time zone. I'll just wake up really early throughout the whole trip, and then it takes me about 1 or 2 days to get back onto the UK time zone, even after 6 weeks in the US. I just never fully, my body clock is UK.
Yeah, and some people are like that. It's just rigid, difficult to change. There are other components to this. So people sometimes find they adjust better on the way back if they're tired. So if you've had a training camp or something, you may well have boosted what your sleep need is. So you might find that you fall asleep slightly quicker and get into a local rhythm slightly quicker. It also depends on, it's not just the direction that you travel. So one of the things that, it's called entrainment, by the way, so getting your circadian rhythm to move either forwards or back. One of the main ways is exposure to sunlight at the correct time of the day, but it depends on where you are. So if you want to shift your circadian rhythm, but there isn't any light around at that time because it's nighttime, you can't really do that. So there are some, we work with a team who'd recently flown to Japan, and that was a similar situation, that they weren't going to have access to sunlight at a time they wanted to shift their circadian rhythm. So it was quite challenging for them.
So what do they do? What can you do if you are going to have to deal with jet lag and perform on a different time zone?
So you want to try and shift your circadian rhythm as best you can, but assuming that you can't make any progress there, a lot of it is about knowing when in the day you're going to be your sleepiest and trying to, if you're going for a work meeting or something, you perhaps try and shift it so it's not at that particular time. If you're traveling for work and doing a presentation, there might be a time when you're actually on your local circadian time zone, or not the local one, your original one, that is in a wake phase, so you'd feel more awake. So there are kind of red zones that we would call them, when you want to avoid doing any high-risk activities because you're going to be too sleepy. So that's one way of approaching it. But there's other things. So melatonin is a way that you can shift your circadian rhythm. So it's not all about exposure to light. So melatonin that we would normally prescribe as an immediate release. So melatonin is often known as to treat insomnia, to treat poor sleep. But the evidence isn't actually quite so good for that. But it is good if you take it in an immediate release form for nudging your circadian rhythm back or forwards.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you recommend people take that before? So if they've taken a race, I would never want to take it the night before a race because I can sometimes feel a bit groggy. But how kind of far in advance would you take melatonin to shift your circadian rhythm enough to make you feel good for the race, but without making you feel groggy for it?
Yeah. So again, it varies from person to person how many hours you can shift in one go. For people who have what you call an intrinsic circadian rhythm disorder, so they're this idea of like morning larks or night owls, but they're like mega night owls. So if you're trying to treat that, you might even go in 15-minute increments per day, so quite small. So if you can manage more than that, you can do it in bigger steps. And that would influence the timing of exposure to light and for taking melatonin. But it is quite different whether you're taking. So the immediate release is kind of there and it's gone, so that won't hang over into the morning because that is much more about pulling your circadian rhythm in one direction. But the modified release that you take for insomnia, that can loiter a bit, but yeah, it's not that good for insomnia, particularly in younger people. So there's some evidence in the over 55s but you're probably not going to get as much benefit from that.
What about if you're training late as well? So I know Rose and I definitely experienced this, where we used to train in the evenings.
Yeah.
Now we don't, very thankfully. But you get home late, you've still got to eat, you've got the adrenaline from your session, and it's really, really hard to get to sleep at a time that you want to.
Yes.
Well, number one, I guess, why is that? And number two, what can you do? Would an example be taking melatonin?
Yeah, it's another really good question. So people often find that the evening training disrupts sleep. You find that with a lot of evening games in Premier League, for example. People often find it's really difficult to sleep that night. Part of it is because your body temperature goes up when you train. So when you go from the wake phase of your circadian rhythm to the sleep phase, that's usually accompanied by a drop in your core body temperature of about 0.5 to 1.5 degrees. So if you're hot, you find that transition more difficult to make. That's why if it's really cold in winter, you know that if you kind of lie still in your bed, and warm up that section, that you'll fall asleep eventually. But in summer, you can forget it because you're hot, you can't do that transition. So that's one of the reasons why people struggle to sleep. Sometimes people are just a bit psychologically pumped. If it's been a difficult training session or a race, if you've got a lot going on in your mind, that you're not in the right sort of psychological state for sleep. So that's one thing. A lot of athletes train with caffeine. So you've got a lot of caffeine knocking around. That needs to get out of your system. And there's also other aspects of recovery. So while sleep is really important for recovery, there are other components. So you'd be rehydrating during that time if you've become dehydrated, and nutrition if you're trying to take food on board afterwards, that the digestion of that can disrupt your sleep. So there's a few good reasons, but no, famously, athletes struggle to sleep after late night training.
Have you ever wondered how pro runners can run so much and yet stay injury free? Well, here's a little secret. It's in their shoes. Meet ENERTOR, the revolutionary running insole that absorbs 51% of the force of each foot strike. Designed for and with elite runners, Enertors not only protect you from injury, but also boost your energy return, helping you run faster for longer, pain-free.
With so many big names behind them, including Usain Bolt, I was keen to try them. If I'm being honest, I didn't think insoles were for me. I didn't think I needed them, but when I tried them, I was shocked because you really feel that energy return in every foot strike. It makes me feel really bouncy when I run, especially when my legs are feeling tired. Want to experience the ENERTOR difference? Try them out risk-free on their website with their 60-day money-back guarantee. And for our lucky listeners, you can use the code 5mileseasy at checkout for 15% off your order.
Unlock your running potential with ENERTOR insoles today. The nutrition point. I've heard that, and this was something I really struggled with when I used to train in the evening. I've heard that you shouldn't eat within about 4 hours of going to sleep. Now, when I trained in the evening, I had to eat when I came home, and I really struggled because it was so late and I kind of didn't really feel like much food. And then I would wake up in the middle of the night starving.
Yeah.
And I've kind of experimented with it and tried to eat earlier, but then I just get hungry.
Yeah.
What is the good balance? What's your view on it and eating? What can we eat to sleep better?
So there's no kind of hard and fast rules. I think it's the broad brushstrokes of this is what I'd probably encourage you to look at. So if you eat a big meal right before bed, your body, you know what your stomach's like when you're digesting food, that it's quite gurgly, and that can, in the same way as I mentioned about, bits of light in the bedroom, that it can pull you up to shallower states of sleep. So you can find that. People get reflux as well, so acid reflux, so that can be a problem if you're eating a big meal and then suddenly lying completely flat, that will disrupt your sleep. But at the same time, if you go to bed distractedly hungry, then you're not going to sleep for that reason. So there's no kind of hard and fast rules, but somewhere in the middle probably. And there are some foods that are easier to digest, particularly some of the kind of meals in a bottle and so on, that they probably cause less chaos on your digestive system.
Okay, so if people are training late, then maybe go for something like that, like a good complex protein shake with carbs in it.
Yeah, I would say so. But it's very much about what works for you. And this is, I think, a problem about how sleep input has been in the past, that it's just too regimented, that you get told this is how you sleep. If you know that going to sleep hungry don't work for you, then that's absolutely not what you should do. So it's really about listening to your own body and kind of basing what you do on your own personal experience, which is very much our approach. When we work on a one-to-one with clients, it's very much about understanding what people's sleep has been like in the past, what good sleep looks like to them, what influences their sleep, good or bad, and basing treatment and goals around that.
And then what about caffeine? You mentioned that as well. Is there a time of day where we should stop drinking caffeine because it's going to affect our sleep later? How does it work?
Yeah, so caffeine. So we talked about the two different systems that control sleep. One is the circadian rhythm. The other is this thing called the adenosine sleep drive. So adenosine is a chemical that your body makes whenever you are awake, and this accumulates. And the more adenosine you have, the more sleepy you feel. And the only thing that can get rid of adenosine is sleep. Caffeine works to block adenosine. So it gives you this temporary postponement of tiredness, amongst other things that it causes. So is there a particular time of the day you should stop drinking it? Really personal. I usually can drink coffee up until bedtime and I'm fine. I did have to put that coffee down earlier because it was so strong from around the corner. I don't think I could have drunk that. But yeah, it's quite personal. A colleague I work with won't drink coffee after midday because it keeps them awake. So really, really personal.
Do you think some of it's in your head? I was talking to Rose about this yesterday, where we were saying if you can't sleep at night, you'll blame it on something that's happened in the day. So you could easily be like, oh, it was that coffee I had at 1 p.m. But I guess it might not be that.
Well, it kind of can be. I mean, there's a lot of psychological kind of effect from coffee. So a lot of people will say that as soon as they smell or sip a coffee that they feel alert and awake, because there's this kind of Pavlov's dog-based conditioning that you get from all sorts of things, but also from coffee. So you can get a psychological effect from it. But yeah, if you can't sleep, you basically go through a catalogue in your mind, don't you, of what could have triggered it. And that's why if you have a partner who snores, that if you wake up in the night, you'll almost certainly blame their snoring for why you can't get back to sleep. But it could be a whole host of other reasons that are actually keeping you up. It's just something that you can hang your hat on. And
then what about, I've heard having caffeine before a nap can then make you super alert when you wake up from the nap. Is that
the nappuccino? That's called.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So if you can do a nappuccino, then I would really encourage you to do it because it's a fantastic sounding idea. So napping, there's a good way to nap and a bad way to nap. So napping really is about 20 minutes sleep. So I mentioned earlier about the sleep cycle, that you fall asleep into light N1 sleep, N2, and then you hit deep N3 sleep. What you don't want to do from a nap is go into deep non-REM 3 sleep, because you'll get sleep inertia when you wake up. So the whole idea about a nap is that you feel energized and alert. So if you're going to then trigger sleep inertia, that's the opposite of what you wanted. So 20 minutes, you're very unlikely to go into deep non-REM 3, but you will wake up feeling like $1 million. So if you can take a coffee and then 20 minutes later, which is roughly the amount of time it takes for caffeine to work, and then wake up, then you'll get like a double boost. But I find if I try a nappuccino, as soon as I sip a coffee, I feel alert, I feel awake, just because that kind of psychological component. So for me, it doesn't work. But yeah, definitely experiment with it.
So napping 20 minutes, but much longer than that will make you feel worse. Does napping actually help with, when you go into that stage of sleep, does it help with muscle recovery? Because I know a lot of athletes do nap during the day for recovery purposes.
Yeah, I think it's what aspect of recovery would it work on? I think you're less likely to get some of these physical components of recovery, like if you've got DOMS or you're just aching all over. A nap is probably less likely to make a big impact there. But if you feel mentally exhausted, a lot of people say that's really where the benefit from a nap is. A lot of the research on napping, and there has been research on napping, you might be surprised to hear, but is actually about driver risk, and there's various psychomotor vigilance tests, they're called. So if people are short-slept and having to drive, that a nap makes a significant difference on your risk of an accident, because you are feeling cognitively more fresh. But it's probably less of a physical impact.
The thing that stops me napping is I worry that then it will impact my sleep at night.
Right, yeah.
Is that true, or is it because I'm not going into deep sleep? So
yeah,
will I be all right?
So napping best practice would be 20 minutes, but probably not after 4-ish. And that, again, there's no hard rule there. But you don't want to nap too close to your habitual bedtime for that reason. But no, you're absolutely right. In 20 minutes, you won't be going to deep sleep, so you're not going to eat a lot into that drive for sleep. So this adenosine sleep pressure, if you are sleeping, you will be reducing your adenosine, but in those first few stages of sleep for only 20 minutes, it's unlikely to make a significant difference. But definitely experiment. If you can nap, then definitely give it a go, but 20 minutes on the dot, and then see how your sleep is that night.
Interesting. And I guess linked to that, but flip the other way, is sleep debt. If you've had a bad night's sleep, can you make up for it by napping?
Yes. So sleep debt is an interesting idea. In principle, it would be the idea that if your adenosine is increasing, whereas normally you'd have a good night's sleep, you'd drop your adenosine down to baseline, wake up, and it would repeat the process. If you sleep badly and you've short-slept, you're waking up with an already raised adenosine sleep drive, and so it will be higher by the time you get into bed. So do you need to sleep more to get that down to baseline. The important point here is that sleep has a quality as well as a quantity, and sleep is adaptable. All of this, extended periods of wake, increased training, changes how much your body will manage its sleep. So a lot of people find they will sleep longer, but even if you don't sleep longer, you will probably sleep deeper. So your sleep architecture will change as a response of your sleep need. So you'll have more deep N3 sleep. So sleep debt, sometimes the idea tends to not acknowledge that quality of sleep. It just thinks about quantity. Most people will find they do sleep longer. For me, if I've not slept well one night, I'll get into bed an hour early the following night and I'll make it up that way. But if I didn't, I would probably just sleep deeper. So it'd probably be okay.
So we don't need to panic if we've had a week of bad sleep and then the following week, we don't need to think every single night this week, we need like 2 extra hours every night.
No, definitely don't panic. So, that kind of anxiety around sleep is one of the main reasons why sleep gets disrupted. And I think sometimes when people haven't slept well, people often respond by getting into bed too early, sometimes really early when they're not sleepy. So what will happen is they'll lie in bed awake, trying to sleep, which, as we all know, is so frustrating. And when you're frustrated, you won't sleep. So you'd actually go past your normal bedtime. Yeah. So, and that's actually one of the key ways that insomnia develops, actually, is through trying to extend your window for sleep, but not actually managing to get off.
Interesting. So does it actually, with sleep debt, does it work? I'm imagining kind of a bank. Does it work as a one-to-one ratio? So if I have an hour less, if I have an hour extra the next night, I will have repaid that debt. Or if I have 3 20-minute naps for the next 3 days, I'll have repaid that debt. Does it work like that? Or is that too simplistic?
I mean, it brings the idea forwards, doesn't it? That there is an exchange rate of sorts, but it's probably not always one-to-one. So if you slept, now you could probably do this. You could sleep 3 hours every night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, do through the week. You wouldn't need to make up all of those hours at the end, because what would change? You probably would sleep a few more hours. But if you were to wear a sleep monitor, you would see that you've gone through a lot more deep sleep, slow wave sleep, non-REM 3 sleep. And so you've got basically more bang for your buck, to keep your money idea, that it's gone further during that same set amount of time. And another good example here is that if you've got any friends who've got young children, these are people who hitherto would have said, I need 8 hours. I need 8 hours, otherwise I won't function. But for the last week, they've had 4 or 5, and they think, how am I alive? But it's because their quality has changed, that during those 4 hours of sleep, you'll probably find you can't wake them up because they're in such a deep state of sleep. So it's not just about time sleeping, it is about quality as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And how about the other way around? Can you bank sleep in advance? So I think an example that would be very relatable for a lot of listeners is they know they've got a big race coming up. I know for me, the night before a race, I do panic a bit about my sleep. I think I'm not going to sleep tonight. But actually, if I've slept really well for the week before, does that help?
So sleep banking, and that was the term as well, so that was bang on. Sleep banking was an idea few years ago, maybe a decade ago, that if you could, as you say, get sleep in the bank, that in that pre-race period when anxiety levels are high and you're not going to sleep very well, or for after the race when you want to recover well, or if it's a tournament, say, and you want to make sure you're recovering in between matches, that can you get it in the bank? And the answer is generally no, just because it's quite difficult to sleep more than you need. So if you like, I could sleep less, I can control that, but I can't sleep more. Like, generally speaking, not unless I need it. That if I try and stay in bed longer than, I'm around sort of seven and a bit hours ideally. If I stay in bed for 9 hours, I'll just be awake for an hour and a half.
So in actually, theory, if you are sleeping more, it's just because you actually need it.
Yeah, most likely. So your sleep can react that way, but it's sleep is, what it comes back to is the idea that sleep is an involuntary process, that you can't make yourself sleep. I don't know if you've ever thought about how your body actually knows to sleep. Well, because it's involuntary.
It just tells you.
Well, exactly. So most people just get into bed and it happens. And it's actually through that Pavlov's dog association of the bed meaning sleep, that as babies, children, when you're tired, when you're sleepy, you get put into bed and you sleep. And so it's through that, this is what the bed means. So this is generally how people know that's how sleep's triggered. But you don't know how to wake up. Like, that's similarly completely involuntary. So you can't really choose to sleep longer. It's fundamentally difficult to do. In theory, it would work fine, but in practice, it's not something that's ever amounted to anything more than lying in bed for hours, getting quite annoyed that you can't sleep.
What about injury in relation to sleep? Is there actually any scientific evidence that having less sleep is linked to more injury?
So again, short answer is probably no. So there was a systematic review that looked at a number of different research studies that looked into this. So it looked across the board. It looked at athletes, endurance athletes. It was quite varied. It looked at dancers. It looked at American football players. And it looked at musculoskeletal injuries. And it looked at concussion. And it tried to see, is there a pattern between people who don't sleep very much and people who get injuries? And there isn't anything particularly conclusive between that. The sleep doesn't build into you any musculoskeletal resilience or kind of concussive resilience. Where it is important is in the recovery afterwards, that once you've got an injury, if you sleep poorly, your recovery tends to be longer, all other things being equal. And so if you can sleep better during that recovery phase, then you are going to recover better. And it's interesting that you do get certain cycles emerging here. So if once you've had an injury, once you're trying to rehab, if as a result of that you're getting pain, you're acknowledging your reduction in function, you're getting frustrated at that, you're training less, you're frustrated, your mood is low, you'll find that your sleep is disrupted. And because your sleep is disrupted, that prolongs your recovery. And it works the same way that if you're not sleeping very well, you're undermotivated, your injury isn't recovering as well as you would like. Recovery is slow, frustration, and you can see how these cycles are set up. So this is an area that we work in quite a lot with athletes. It's actually in that recovery phase, making sure that they are feeling in control of their sleep and comfortable with this idea about it sometimes being disrupted, but how to get it back on track as best as you can.
That's so interesting. With recovery, obviously, I've just at the back end of an injury, and I'm obviously training so much less than I'm used to, so I'm not as tired. But should I be sleeping the same amount as when I'm in a big training block?
So again, it's probably a question that you could only really answer yourself about how you find that your sleep adjusts. So some people do find that when they're training loads that they need to sleep more in terms of hours. But again, if you're finding that sleep architecture is changing, this is an aspect of sleep that you don't really have any insight into. All you're left is this kind of secondary experience of whether your sleep was good or not. And so as long as you're getting that, as long as you're feeling that your sleep was adequate and you're supported throughout the day, now you're feeling alert, you're feeling energized, you're not wanting to go back to sleep, then I think the answer would be that you're sleeping enough for you. But it will adjust. Yeah, so the way that your sleep adapts and your body adapts, your sleep would change. But I think as long as you're getting that kind of sleep satisfaction, then I'd say that's okay.
What I'm getting is it's a real case of listening to your body. How does this link in with sleep tech? Because there is so much sleep tech out there now. And, I have a Garmin, and each night it will tell me a sleep score. It will tell me my HRV, and it will recommend how much sleep I need the next night.
Will it actually?
Yeah.
It'll tell you how many hours?
Yeah.
Really?
To the minute. How much sleep I should be getting the next night based on how I've been sleeping over the previous nights and also what I've been doing in the day, assuming I've been wearing it 24/7. So how does it, is that accurate? And I guess to what extent should we be listening to the sleep tech and listening to our own bodies?
Yeah, and this is a really hot topic. So sleep tech is good for some things. So firstly, before we even get started on the metrics that it produces, it actually has put sleep on the agenda. So talked earlier about the three pillars of health, that it's exercise, nutrition and sleep. Now sleep's been a bit of a late comer at being acknowledged as part of this. So when you have modern tech that includes sleep metrics, you think, well, clearly it's important. So it's bumped up the agenda. It's also brought in the idea of sleep quality with this sleep score, that it doesn't just tell you how many hours you slept for, it will tell you how good it feels the quality was, which is another important point to get over the net when you are thinking about how you want to improve your sleep, or do I need to improve my sleep? It does have limitations, mainly around the accuracy of the metrics. So there's one is called total sleep time, TST. So that's a big metric that we use in sleep clinics, and that's pretty good. So it makes the assumption that if there's no light, if you're not moving, and sometimes if your heart rate has dropped to lower, that's more associated with sleep, it'll make the assumption that you're asleep, and that is generally quite accurate. But where it does fall down a bit is on sleep staging. So when it's trying to determine whether you're in non-REM 1 or REM or awake, these are less accurate. If you compare it to the gold standard, which is called a polysomnogram, so these are the electrodes that you have on your head in a sleep lab, they're about 50% accurate. So getting there, but not generally close enough to make a useful conclusion about your sleep.
Wow, so if the polyelectrodes are only 50% accurate.
So that's 50% compared to the polysomnogram. So it's right 50% of the time. And you could say that on a population level, perhaps that's generates useful information, and you could say that perhaps if it's used on the same individual and that you can track change on that one individual, that while it might not be accurate, the degree of change might be more accurate. You could say that. And then there's the sleep score, and the problem with most of the sleep scoring results is that they're based on what you'd call black box algorithms, that you don't know actually how they are calculating that score. So it's very difficult to say whether that's accurate or not. But if it's telling you in quite simple terms that what you need to do is go to bed at whatever time, that is at odds at what we would say in a sleep clinic. So we always think about bedtimes as threshold times, that if this is your aim to go to bed at 9:30, that you just don't go to bed. You can't go to bed before 9:30, but you can only go to bed after 9:30 if you feel sleepy, because it's well known that if you get into bed when you're not sleepy, that you aren't going to sleep, or you're very unlikely to. So that's perhaps a bit more basic. Maybe it gives you a rough idea about what you should be aiming for, that you should perhaps be shifting your focus to sleep if you've been too busy during the day. But I think hard advice on times to get into bed are probably going to cause problems.
Yeah, I realise so I wear an Aura ring, and I do find it useful. Like, I use it as kind of a bit of guidance, but I definitely listen to my body more. But I knew not to fully rely on it when I was in the hairdressers the other week, and it told me I'd had a half an hour nap, and I had not. I must have been so relaxed in the chair. But I was fully awake, and it asked me if I'd had a half an hour nap, and I was okay, well, you clearly think I'm sleeping when I'm not. So yeah, it's definitely.
You were asleep, did you? No,
I definitely didn't fall asleep. But yeah, clearly I was relaxed. Okay, and what about just other tips for sleep hygiene as well? So you did mention earlier a dark room and a good temperature as well, like a cold room. What else is there that we can help ourselves with?
Yeah, so sleep hygiene, it's just got such an unfortunate name. It doesn't tell you anything about what it is. It sounds more like cleaning bed sheets or something than advice for sleep. We define it as the general good advice to get yourself sleeping better. So it's looking at how you should sometimes focus on the daytime activities to reinforce sleep at night, getting your mind and body into the right state for sleep, and as you say, getting your bedroom into the best, making it the best possible environment for sleep. If ever you've been to the doctor with poor sleep, they'll tell you about sleep hygiene. But the issue is it often comes across as a long list of quite arbitrary looking rules without any explanation behind it. So the risk with anything looking like rules is that it's tempting to do it to the letter, but that in itself can actually generate stress, generate worry, and that can disrupt your sleep. So you can tie yourself in a knot trying to sleep better and end up sleeping worse. So it's always really important when you're talking about sleep hygiene to kind of talk about some of the reasoning behind it. So we divide it into three. So the first one is, we call it scheduling or timing. And this is really when you're not sleeping well, rather than focusing a lot on night and not sleeping, but by reinforcing the wake phase of your circadian rhythm, you'll find that sleep phase comes more naturally at night. So these are things like getting out into sunlight during the day, ideally in the first hour after waking, moderate exercise or, intense exercise, but something that gets your heart rate up in the first half of the day can help here. And the other thing about rhythms is they like consistency and regularity. So having a fixed wake up time and not varying it by more than an hour at weekends can really build in that regularity, which helps you sleep more at night. So that would be about timing. In terms of preparation for sleep, caffeine, smoking, if you smoke, these are things that promote wakefulness. So it's sensible if you're struggling with your sleep to maybe think carefully about when in the day that you have caffeine. So a lot of people find avoiding it just before bed can help. And then in terms of sort of mental preparation, it's good to have a wind down routine. So there's a lot of people who, particularly with working from home, that you finish work and stride straight into bed when your mind is still very much on. But you often need a bit of time to actually relax your mind. And it's worth thinking about the practicalities here. So having an alarm at, maybe an hour before your bedtime can just mean that after this point, you don't check your inbox, don't doom scroll, don't go on social media, don't do any work, and actually try and find a relaxing activity that just kind of brings your brain down from the ceiling just before you get into bed.
Is that because of the mental stimulation, or is that the screen?
Good question. So there's loads of stuff said about screens. So in the same way that a bright light stimulates the wake phase of your circadian rhythm, this isn't a kind of light that you want to be exposed to when you're getting ready for bed. And so there's been lots of discussion about whether the light you get from your phone, this blue light, is doing that. And I think it's probably overstated. What does make more of a difference is if you're looking at social media or checking your emails. So I find that personally, if I'm checking my emails in bed, I can almost guarantee I'm not going to sleep very well because my mind's just on, that it starts to whir. So I really try and avoid that. So I think that's probably the bigger difference that you have with screens. And this is the thing you find with a lot of sleep advice, that you're told to quite religiously keep your phone out of the bedroom. I kind of like the phone. Like, it is useful.
It's also
like,
my
I don't
alarm,
have to go
so-
on. Yeah, and it's your alarm, exactly. So these blanket advice that you get to kind of get your phone out of the room actually generates more stress and irritation, and also just brings your focus to sleep and makes sleep this big thing. And that sleep effort, it can easily come across as sleep effort, that can disrupt your sleep. So you have to make sure that all of this advice is realistic and workable for 2024. So we never say keep your phone out of your room, but maybe be a bit thoughtful about what you're doing on it.
What about alcohol?
What about alcohol? Good question. So alcohol, people who drink will probably say that if you have alcohol, you'll fall asleep a bit quicker. But sleep isn't just about how quickly you fall asleep. It's about this idea of quality and quantity as well. So mostly if you drink a lot, you will find that your sleep is disrupted later in the night. So if you look at sleep architecture, that gets adjusted in a negative way. If you drink a lot, you actually eliminate REM. So you don't get REM, stage of sleep. And that's one of the reasons why, or thought to be one of the reasons why, chronic alcohol use is associated with so many mood problems. So depression and anxiety, because you're not getting that exposure to REM when you're sleeping. Other things people get, so heartburn, if you drink a lot, you do start to get hungover, or you get hot flushes. So all of these things can disrupt sleep. So generally speaking, alcohol is bad for sleep.
Is that a blanket rule, like one glass is bad, or is that only if you've had kind of 3?
Yeah. Again, I think it does vary. And again, it's sometimes difficult to say, because sleep, when we're talking about the effect of alcohol and the sleep staging, again, this isn't something that you have direct experience of on most nights. So in research settings, they'll find that you get more disruption, that you might have shorter sleep stages with more wake, less consolidated blocks of N3. If you drink more, less REM. But I think the point at which that happens probably varies from person to person. Alcohol is listed as the world's most popular sleeping tablet, because a lot of people do drink alcohol if they're struggling with their sleep, but that's really not it's not much of a workable solution. That yes, you'll fall asleep quicker probably, but that will cost you later in the night with more poor quality sleep.
Are there any other myths out there around sleep that we've not gone through?
Yeah, I mean, 8 hours is probably the big one.
Okay.
That people think they need 8, but some people need 6. And so if you chase 8 by getting into bed 2 hours early, all you're going to do is get annoyed and take longer than 2 hours to get to sleep. It might take 3 hours because you got so annoyed. And so chasing after perfect sleep, this idea of perfect sleep, can actually cause insomnia. So that's one thing. Perfect sleep every night, and I think sleep scores are probably part of that people like to boast about how perfect their sleep scores are for ages, but perfect sleep absolutely, definitely doesn't exist. You are always going to have poor sleep occasionally. Sometimes there's probably not even going to be a good reason for that. But the way that poor sleep is linked, or sleep disruption is linked to stress, worry and anxiety, that is an unfortunate part of the human condition, that you have this in your life. And with this stress comes a degree of anxiety. So striving for perfect sleep isn't helpful and generates many more problems than that kind of focusing on sleep can fix.
Interesting. So, I mean, we have so many tips from today on how we can sleep better. But if people are listening to this and thinking, oh God, there's so much I need to change here. I can do so many things to improve my sleep, or actually I've tried so many things and have been struggling. If you've got one golden rule, one thing that they can change today, what would it be that you think has the biggest impact?
Biggest impact. If you're really not sleeping well, I'll say the biggest impact is this. If you're in bed and you can't sleep, get out of bed. That probably is the biggest thing. Lying in bed does 2 things. It gets you so annoyed. You get so frustrated that you can't sleep. And then it's actually that annoyance that keeps you awake. Secondly, it weakens that link between the bed meaning sleep. That whereas previously, as babies, you get put into bed and you have that really strong association of the bed meaning sleep, as getting into bed that triggers sleep. With insomnia or just poor sleep, if you're spending longer in bed awake, that's when it starts to trigger. And you find people who say, I'll fall asleep in front of the TV, but as soon as I get into bed, my mind just takes off, because that's what the bed has then become to mean, that it triggers these anxious thoughts, or not even necessarily anxious thoughts, but active thoughts. So if you're not sleeping, get out of bed and just find a relaxing and distracting activity to do while you wait for that urge to sleep to come back.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. I mean, everything you've discussed today is just so interesting and useful. And I think we both agree that we could just talk to you for hours to ask more questions, because, I think sleep is just the most powerful tool that if you could sell it, it must be like the most successful thing to ever sell. But thank you so much, David, for everything you discussed today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us for 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.